Usually we'd have our precepts retreat at this time of the year, but we can't because of the COVID. Couldn't last year because of the COVID. We surely hope to do it next year, but this year we're having this series of 6 talks instead. So that, in fact, the most important thing is that we practice the precepts more than just, taking them is actually really great. It's a big step because it's publicly saying, I'm going to do this. But failing that, we can keep to them. And these talks have been about how to do that. So it's actually just a practice of daily life, keeping to the precept. It's not some esoteric brain thing. It's practical advice, really, how to live our life with minimal, to free ourselves from suffering, actually. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Twice a month, here at Shasta Abbey, and actually in all Buddhist traditions, we read our precepts. And we just did it today. We have a ceremony when we do that. And as part of that ceremony, before we actually start reading the precepts, we have a preamble. And as part of this preamble, there's a little section that I'm going to talk about. And it's my favorite part of the whole, of that little scripture. And it says, when you keep to the precepts, it is as darkness meeting light, as a poor person receiving a treasure, as a sick person regaining their balance, as a chained prisoner being released from jail, as a traveler to distant lands returning home. And all these analogies are really kind of inspiring and cheering. All of them give you a sense of relief, relief of getting something we didn't have before, or leaving something behind that we didn't need. The relief of having light in the darkness, or the relief of being well again after being sick, the relief of being released from jail. But each of these analogies has a slightly different slant on what it means to keep to the precepts. So I thought I'd like to talk about them. As we know, the precepts aren't a club to beat ourselves with. They're liberating. They're to free ourselves from suffering. They're not something to make ourselves miserable with. Oh, I'm supposed to be keeping the precepts and I'm not doing it, and I've broken another one, they're just awful. That's not the idea. It's more, how do I help myself? How do I help myself not to create suffering for myself or other people? And all of these analogies kind of point to that. So the first one, when you keep to the precepts, it is as darkness meeting light. And why is that? Because the precepts show us the way. They show us what is good to do, what is good not to do. They kind of shine a light on what we're doing, things that we might not have thought of. We can see more clearly, more honestly, and look at ourselves. Oh, I probably shouldn't be doing that. Things we might have taken for granted. When we're about to do something that really isn't quite good, maybe cheat a little bit on our taxes or spend our time at work chatting to our friends rather than getting on with what we're supposed to be doing. In a way, that's a kind of stealing, And we look at this is the darkness meeting light. There's a little light shining on that, what we've been doing. We think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing that anymore. But it's a kindness. It's not a critical judgment thing. It's actually a kind way of helping ourselves. Oh, I don't want to do that, actually. That's not good to do. And we don't quite get away with it anymore because we've seen it. And having seen it, it's not as though we hadn't. As I said, it's not a harsh judgment, but it's a kindly light, as it were, to show us things that we need to see. When you keep to the precepts, it's as a poor person receiving a treasure. Another of these little analogies. The precepts are a treasure that we safeguard and cherish. They're likened to, the precepts are as luminous pearls or as diamonds, as really precious, valuable, something you would not want to lose because they are so precious to us, how we keep to them, we safeguard them, we remember them, and we try to put them into practice. We don't have to think each day, oh, what is the precept? Was the first one or the second one? It's just, what's good to do here? The 3 pure precepts. We can keep track of 3, cease from evil, do any good, do good for others. We can kind of keep track of those. When you get to all the 10, at first, when you're not used to them, you might feel yourself, which was the 7th, what was that one? Don't worry. Just, am I ceasing from doing harm? Am I doing good? Am I doing good for others? Doesn't mean I have to be going out looking for good to do, but am I living my life well? And when we're not keeping to the precepts, we start to get that niggly feeling like, I don't feel so good. What did I just do? What did I just say? What am I about to do? And we can see that. So the treasure is what helps us to point our life in the right direction, trying to do our best to live by the precepts. And this helps other people too. When we try to keep to the precepts, other people are more likely to do the same. When we stop speaking, criticizing other people, our friends might think, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I shouldn't say that. And it often happens that they stop doing that around us and maybe stop doing it at other times. It's not us trying to feel we're superior. I keep to the precepts and these people don't. It's more that we're trying to do what's good. And this actually helps other people because they know, actually, that speaking against other people isn't a good thing to do, whether they've ever taken the precepts or ever heard of Buddhism or not. We know that actually there's something about speaking against other people that doesn't feel quite right. Just as one example. But there's so many things like that. Just saying, no, I'm going to try to keep to these precepts. And it has an effect on others without our trying to be somebody or try to be better than others. Just trying to do our best. People often think that, money and wealth are the great treasure, the things really worth having. Well, by this time, most of us know it's not really the case. What's much more valuable is to have a peaceful heart. And a peaceful heart comes from doing our best to live well, to keep to the precepts, to not be doing damage, harming other people, or harming ourselves, because as we know, when we do that, we do not have a peaceful heart. When we've said something unkind to somebody, we don't feel good, we feel bad, and then we can maybe go and apologize. But it'd be nice if we hadn't done that, or we do something that really we shouldn't do, hurt somebody especially. It's really that horrid feeling you get. And the more you try to keep to the precepts, the more that comes up in more subtle ways. When you do something that maybe you wouldn't have noticed it some years ago, but now you think, I shouldn't have said that. That wasn't really very kind. It was a bit judgmental, So it's a treasure, actually, because it helps us to stop creating suffering. And the money and valuables and all that thing that people value in the world, it's so much better, so much more valuable to live with a peaceful heart without grasping in selfishness, which just make ourselves miserable, really. The precepts help us do that. Bernie Madoff, the man who made off with billions of dollars of other people's money, we know about him. He ended up in prison. He died the other day at the age of 82 from kidney disease. And that's just so sad, because he'd ruined all these people's lives, done immense amounts of damage. People trusted him. He broke their trust. And he kind of got stuck in this thing, He can't have been a happy person. He did all this damage. And for what? He ends up in prison, dying in prison. And it wasn't even a big news item. People had moved on. They're much more interested in other things that were happening. And here's this poor man who's got himself in this horrible mess, done untold amounts of damage to people, to get money, to get fame and respect and so forth. And of course he lost it all. And there's just such a blinding example of what not to do, because it created so much suffering for himself, his family. One of his sons died of cancer, the other one committed suicide. Just really sad. So I was thinking of him, and I think I'll offer him a little extra merit, because that, poor man dying in prison, no matter what he did, not a happy person, not a wise person. As a sick person regaining his balance when we keep to the precepts is as a sick person regaining their balance. The Buddha often likened himself to a doctor. You talk about this quite often. I'm like a doctor who prescribes medicine to help with your suffering. And he'd sometimes prescribe different kinds of medicine for different people. But the great medicine is the Dharma, of course, and the precepts. To have the precept that we can keep to is a huge help with the lessening of suffering, helping us to stop creating suffering for ourselves and other people. So as a sick person regaining their balance, because we're not creating suffering, and we're not suffering so much because we don't have that crummy feeling you get when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing or doing harm, A major remedy. They show us how to stop creating suffering for ourselves and to stop creating suffering for other people as well. Most of the precepts are about how to treat other people. Don't lie, don't steal, do good for others and all that. Don't speak against others. Most of them are about how we treat others. And we can apply them to ourselves too. Don't put ourselves down. Don't steal from ourselves. Don't kill our own heart by doing something that we really should not do, by working against it. When we treat other people well, we treat ourselves well. We're not making ourselves sick like this poor man in prison. Sick in body, sick in spirit, by doing harm. So it's like a sick person regaining their balance. I like that. Regaining your balance, because when you're sick, you're off balance. You may be literally off balance with dizziness and the like, but you're just not right. You're not feeling right. And then when you get well, you're back in balance. You're back on your own 2 feet and feeling more like yourself, as they say. I'm not myself, Well, when you get over your illness, you're more balanced. You're more on your own feet. Keeping to the precepts is as a chained prisoner being released from jail. When we keep to the precepts, we're freeing ourselves from our selfishness, because selfishness is a bondage. It's a terrible trap. And we've all got selfishness. None of us is completely selfless. But the less we are selfish, the freer we are. When we live for ourselves, we're bound, like that poor man Madoff. He got stuck in his own lies, he got stuck in his own trap. He couldn't get out, and he'd done it to himself. But that's bondage. There's nothing liberating about stealing billions of dollars from other people, then having to lie about it all and getting stuck. It's terribly binding. It's constricting. You're not free. But when you don't do those things, when you actually try to help beings, try not to live by selfishness, it's interesting because you're restraining your selfishness, and yet it's liberating. That restraint is itself freeing. It's not a kind of bound hand and foot by the precepts. It's more, I don't have to do that anymore, I don't have to just grasp for myself anymore. I can to think of other people and to consider, to help other beings, makes us feel so much better than just living for ourselves. I think we've all seen that during this last year with this pandemic, how people came together and helped each other and found joy in that. It helped people with their worry, their fear, their suffering, making masks, all those things that people have done and still do, buying groceries for other people and so forth. All these ways of helping, they liberate us. Being generous liberates us. It frees us from selfishness, because when we just grasp on for ourselves, we're bound. We can't breathe properly because we're squashing ourselves. But when we can be generous and give to other beings, whether it's goods, money, or just our time and attention, our care, spending time with somebody, love for somebody, all of those, they liberate us. They free our heart. They open our heart more than, just thinking about ourselves. That's a very constricting and narrow and unhappy way to live, actually. freedom from blindly following our desires. Of course, it's not that easy. We're always, falling into a trap. Oh, I really want this, and then we think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But we try to do our best, just to restrain that grasping or that blind impulse to grab something or say something unkind or whatever it might be. And, when we start to free ourselves from anger, from constantly being irritated or critical, or just to say, I don't have to do that to myself. I don't have to live with this crabby little mind that's constantly criticizing other people. I can actually let it go by. I can let it go through. There's those little thoughts of whatever it might be. I don't have to grab onto them. They're not my true nature. I can just let them go right on by. Liberating. And our fifth analogy, keeping to the precepts, is as a traveler to distant lands returning home. I love them all actually, but I love this one. When we practice the precepts, we're coming home, we're returning to our true nature, our true heart, because actually we want to live by the precepts. It's our true nature. It's what Buddhas do. Buddhas live by the precepts. Buddhas don't lie and steal and cheat people. Buddhas, keep to the precepts and they pass them down to us. And this is what we truly want to do. Because this is like returning home to our true nature. A traveler to distant lands. We've wandered in samsara. Samsara means wandering. So all these years maybe we've been wandering, looking for our way. We find the precepts and it actually gives us a purpose, where no matter what we may do in our life, no matter what job we may have, or family, or other situations, circumstances we may live in, when we keep to the precepts, it gives us a kind of focus, a rudder, as it were, to guide us, and that really, really helps. So we find our way home to our own heart that wants to live according to the precepts. We all want to be a decent human being, no matter who we are. We want to be somebody that other people can trust. We want to live our life well. And I think even people who do dreadful things, they just don't know any better. They don't know how to do things differently, and they're not happy people. But when we have the precepts and we do our best to keep to them, we're like the traveler to distant lands coming back home. The sick person regaining their balance. We're well now. We're not confused and ill and, crazed anymore. All of those analogies, the darkness meeting light, finding our way through the darkness. Let me look them all up. The poor person receiving a treasure. They are a treasure, a wonderful gift that we have, to be able to keep to these precepts. Although they can seem very, very simple, well, most people know not to lie and steal and cheat people and all that. But actually, when you study them, as you have been these last this time, actually more than 6 weeks, it's been every other week. So for quite a while now, you've been studying these precepts. And as you know, the more you look at them, the more you study them, the more subtle they become. And you say, oh, look at that. I wouldn't have thought of that before. It's a treasure to have this guiding light in our life. Chained prisoner being released from jail, liberated. All of these analogies, they all point to liberation, freedom from suffering. So when we commit ourselves to keeping the precepts, whether we've formally taken them or not, we're making a choice for ourselves. We're changing our life, because it does change our lives. When we take the precepts, we say, I'm going to keep to these. Our life changes. May not be dramatically, but sometimes, sometimes it can be hard to keep a precept. It could be kind of stepping out in faith sometimes. Moment by moment, things arise and we make our choice. Am I going to keep to the precepts here? Or am I going to do the convenient thing? Because so much the way of the world is doing the convenient thing, the things that other people do, the thing that we've always done, the thing that is convenient, or, we think if we keep to the precepts, it will somehow work against us. Not cheating on my taxes, well, I might lose a little bit of money, but I'll have a peaceful heart, and it's much more worth it. Sometimes it's really hard to keep to a precept. Sometimes it may be fine, because it's hard doesn't always mean it's good to do, but sometimes it does. Just to sort of sit still and say, what's good to do here? What do I need to do? And the precepts can help us see that. What's best to do here? Again, sometimes, as I said, it goes against the stream of other people's expectations, or the stream of habit, the stream of our selfishness, which is the thing that we're really trying to work on. And all the precepts help us to work on that. And that is a liberating thing, because it's the selfishness, as I said earlier, that really binds us. Oh, I have to have this, I have to get what I want, I have to do this other thing, I don't want that. It's constricting, but if we can just relinquish some of that and say, well, this may not be convenient, but I think this is the best thing to do. And sure enough, usually it works out much better than doing, well, in fact, just about always, much better than doing the thing that really wasn't that great, but it seemed convenient. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Maybe it wasn't. So we choose to follow the precepts because this is what we truly wish to do, what our heart wishes to do. We're choosing to be awake, to look where we're going, not just to go along blindly without thinking. And it takes commitment and it takes effort. We have to be paying attention, to pay attention to our mind, both what we do and what we say and what we think. That an angry thought arises is not a problem, but if we nurse it and nourish it and feed it and make it like a big angry thought, well, that's holding on to anger. That's contrary to the precepts, because the precepts say, don't do that. That anger arises is not the problem. It's if we nourish it. And I say, I have a right to be angry. That's when you've got suffering. And they're all like that, What do we dwell on? What do we aspire to? What do we wish to do with our life? How do we wish to live? Even when we seem to be constantly failing to keep a precept, we can still keep saying, I still wish to do this. I wish to keep these precepts. I wish to do my best. I may not be perfect, but it's what I truly wish to do. Meditation, Meditation and the precepts go together, as we often say, because when we meditate, we can see more clearly what we need to do. We're not so blinded by our desires, anger, and all that. We can sit still with these things that come through our mind, and we don't have to follow them. It's liberating. And when we keep to the precepts, we're being still. In the midst of a condition, a situation, here we are in some meeting, and we're getting annoyed because of what something somebody is saying is not going our way. Well, we can follow that and feed it, or we can sit and say, oh, I'm starting to get annoyed here. Why? Because I want something. Well, maybe I'm not right. Maybe what they want is actually a better idea. Who knows? Maybe I'm not right. But at least I can see what my mind is doing and not just be dragged along by it. It's liberating. So when we're trying to keep to the precepts, we're putting the meditation into practice. We're sitting still with things. And we meditate, we're practicing the precepts. They go together. And as I said, the precepts are not a kind of bondage. It's not like thou shalt not do such and such. It's more, I undertake to train myself, not to steal, kill, all those things. I undertook to train myself to cease from evil, to do any good, do good for others. I'm sure someone's explained to you that evil in Buddhism isn't like an ultimate badness, It's actually that which causes suffering. That which causes suffering is what is considered evil. Doesn't mean we're an evil person, but we can do an evil deed because it creates suffering. But it doesn't make us a bad person. It just means we did something we really should not have done. We don't have to take that as our identity. Oh, I'm this awful person who did this dreadful thing and it's irredeemable, and it's not like that. We can say, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I really don't want to live that way anymore. I want to do better. I want to keep to the precepts. So when you break a precept, to see, that's what I've done. I'm really sorry. And I'd like to do better. I'd like to do things differently. I don't want to keep doing it that way. Learning as we go, doing our best with compassion for our mistakes. Constantly, the practice of compassion is what we need to come back to. The way to liberation is the precepts. They're not just to make us good people or make us better than other people. They're to help us relinquish suffering, to stop creating it for ourselves, creating it for other people, dwelling on mistakes that we've made, dwelling on the past, fearing the future, to help us to let go of ways we've done things in the past. We don't want to do them now. And we keep having to choose this over and over again. It's not like, okay, I'm taking the precepts, that's it. Over and over again, moment by moment, we choose to keep to them. Breath after breath, thought after thought. We don't have to think about them all the time, because actually after a little while we get a sense. We're not thinking, am I keeping a precept? Wait a minute, how many are there? You couldn't do anything that way. But would you feel that sort of slight discomfort, or is this good to do, or we're trying to make a decision about something, or what should I say here to this person? Then maybe the precepts come up. At least cease from evil, do any good, do good for others. What's good for this person? What do I need to tell them? What is helpful for them? How can I deal with the situation skillfully, be of help, and not just be a thorn in somebody's side? The precepts are the conduct of Buddhas. And to live by the precepts is to do our very best to live as a Buddha would live. We all have this nature of Buddha. We all have that within us, no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, no matter what it looks like. And to live by the precepts as best we can is to do our best to live according to that true nature, to trust it, to have faith in it, to put it into practice, because it's what we truly want. And so there we are, as a traveller to distant lands returning home. That's our keeping of the precepts as best we can.